I want to be clear with you all that a new day has come. To San Francisco, to Oakland, to Baltimore, to Ferguson, to Atlanta, there is a movement sweeping this country, and we are not going to stop until you stop killing us.
Shut it down! Shut it down! The time for the middle ground is over.
Oakland, California in 2011, a group of us were engaged in an Occupy Oakland protest when cops issued one dispersal warning. Within seconds and giving no opportunity to actually disperse, they began to fire beanbags into the crowd. Iraq War veteran Scott Olson was hit. The projectile struck him in the forehead, fractured his skull, caused severe hemorrhaging and permanent brain damages. As fellow comrades rushed to help him, he was unresponsive and bleeding. The cops deployed tear gas canisters directly into that crowd. In 2020, a crowd of young people I've often talked about, which included my daughter, held a peaceful protest for George Floyd. Without warning, the Oakland Police Department and Alameda County Sheriff decided there was a curfew and fired so-called less lethal weapons into the crowd, causing permanent damage, including eye loss to several people. Anti-Police Terror Project, my other org, was the lead plaintiff, and about 25 other impacted people, we were represented by the late civil rights attorney Dan Siegel, sued, asserting OPD had used excessive force, including tear gas, flashbangs, and rubber bullets, and violated First Amendment rights by attacking and kettling peaceful demonstrators. In 2022, the city of Oakland agreed to a $1.5 million settlement with 25 plaintiffs to cover damages and attorney's fees. Perhaps more importantly for the folks in that case was the policy change, which barred further use of these weapons by OPD. Not, however, the federal government, which is invading cities across our country. Flash forward to 2025, and here in Oakland, Reverend Jorge Bautista was shot with a 40-millimeter grenade launcher at a protest in Oakland, California. Folks remember people gathered at the port to stop them from invading our city. Images showed Pastor enveloped in orange smoke after he was shot. An agent shot at his face from about 3 feet away. This is happening all over the country with both local and federal agents using so-called less lethal weapons on community members. My mouth will start to work here any moment, you all. Primarily, this has emerged as folks have taken to the streets to protest the attacks on our immigrant communities and relatives. Joining us to discuss, so I can stop talking, are Dr. Rohini. Is it Haar or Har?
Har, yeah.
Dr. Rohini Haar, an emergency room physician, a UC Berkeley professor, and a member of Physicians for Human Rights. Good morning.
Good morning.
Physicians for Human Rights has a report, Tools of Repression, the Health and Human Rights Impacts of Crowd Control Weapons. We are also joined by Kevin Foster. It's actually Kevin's article that caught my eye. Kevin is an independent journalist based in Portland, Oregon, where I'm imagining you've seen lots of this. He specializes in covering protest activism and accountability. He recently authored an article in Truth Out called "The U.S. is Terrorizing Its Own Citizens with, air quotes, less lethal weapons. Human rights experts condemn the increasing use of weapons like tear gas, pepper balls, and rubber bullets." Good morning, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you both for joining. Thank you so much for continuing to keep this issue in the light. Kevin, and then Dr. Haar, feel free to jump in.
Yeah.
Go a little deeper. What are less lethal weapons? What allows law enforcement to call them less lethal? And some examples of them, please.
Do you want to go for it?
Sure. So, less lethal weapons are typically weapons that police officers and other law enforcement are allowed to use in the United States against civilians, primarily for what they call riots or public safety in assemblies, crowds, things like that. Many times that's protests on the street. Sometimes it could be in stadiums or other places where there's a concern. The problem is that when you use the term less lethal weapon, it doesn't suggest what it actually is, which it can be quite dangerous. We're talking about things like tear gas, rubber bullets and other projectiles, stun grenades, acoustic weapons. These are the sort of main ranges of weapons that we deal with in the United States.
Kevin, to my point in your introduction, have you been a journalist in crowds when any of these less lethal weapons have been? I'm going to call them crowd control weapons, actually, because less lethal weapons is actually a lie. Because after you answer that question, Kevin, I'd like you to talk about Victoria Snellgrove in 2024.
Yeah. I mean, I've been in a number of different crowds and different locations where these have been used, both indiscriminately and I guess more targeted at times. But there's been quite a lot of instances with federal agents in Portland and Los Angeles, and obviously other locations around the country, such as Minneapolis, where they're using these all the time, and there's often very little warning that is given. And I think the thing that's interesting about the less lethal designation is even in I think it's DHS's own guidelines. I forget which document actually, but they said, oh, it's commonly referred to as non-lethal or less than lethal as well. And it's like, okay, those are a big difference, but less lethal sort of that's what I liked about this report is it talks about how those designations kind of downplay what is actually happening here. And Victoria Snellgrove in 2004, she was actually killed by a Boston police officer when he fired an FN 303 round, which is often I've seen mislabeled as a regular pepper ball, which is kind of more like these paintball style rounds, but the FN 303 is more of it's like a hard plastic casing and it actually has little pieces of metal in it. And we've seen DHS or Federal Protective Service destroy multiple people's eyes, partially blinding them within just the past 6 months in California. And that's largely what I talk about in the article. But yeah, there's just these, it's definitely represents a concerning trend. And I've talked with Rohini's colleague, and it's definitely, the way in which these are being used, it definitely presents the possibility that we could have another instance like that.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's why I wanted to start with the history. That's why I wanted to go all the way back to 2011 and right, like this has been happening and increasing, and for sure, more people are going to die. Usually, what I'm talking about less lethal weapons. I talk a lot about tasers because that is often purported as a less lethal weapon, and I always have to say Marcellus Tony's name, who was murdered by the Oakland Police Department in 2017 with the taser, and people are murdered all over the country with tasers all the time. Those aren't the weapons we're talking about this morning, but just to put it in context for my listeners. Dr. Haar, I wanna walk through a couple of the weapons that are highlighted in the Physicians for Human Rights report.
Mhm.
You all start with scattershot impact projectiles, and specifically, you're talking about the utilization by the Los Angeles Police Department. The report calls them tools of collective punishment. Say why.
So, we've been talking about these crowd control weapons for, decades now. What I'm seeing is that in the past few years, there's been a lot of movement in the militarization of US policing, and more weapons are being manufactured, different styles. And often, when those weapons are produced and sold, it's really around like, oh, they're stronger, they're more powerful, they're more potent, which of course is not what you want when you're policing civilians in your own country. One of those in Los Angeles we call scattershot impact projectiles. Many bullets or projectiles that come out, you just see one come out at once. The law enforcement agent can aim that somewhat. Even with one projectile, it's very difficult because at close ranges, it can, move as fast as a live bullet and cause a lot of trauma, broken bones, brain injury. And at far distances, you can't really aim that at all. That sort of gets much worse when you have a scatter shot impact, when there's multiple projectiles coming out at once. There's two different ways that Los Angeles police have been firing that. One, they've been shooting that straight into the air at people's heads, faces, and that sprays a bunch of bullets all over a crowd, like a shotgun. And of course, that causes excessive injuries, that can hurt bystanders, that can hurt people who are doing absolutely nothing wrong, and people who are unprepared. The other way that they're shooting it is called skip firing, which means they kind of aim it down at people's feet or near their feet, and then they're expected to bounce up. The thought being that that's going to hit their knees, but most times that bounces all over the place, and then it becomes really, really unpredictable. We have lots of photos and videos of that just bouncing above people's heads, hitting people's faces, eyes, from the skip fire. Either way, these are incredibly imprecise. And that's why we call it tools of collective punishment, because that doesn't target an individual who's, being violent or hurting public safety or anything. That there's no intended target there. In both of those situations, that hits everybody around you, and that's really not right. We looked at a few other weapons, but I think scattershot projectiles are the lowest hanging fruit that needs to be banned all over the United States, and especially in Los Angeles, which is where we found them used the most.
And we're going to get into other weapons. I'm just going to interject quickly to say, man, my listeners know that I'm a gun owner unapologetically as a black woman in this country. Not because of my neighborhood, but because of the experiment we call America. But when I heard scattershot, I was like, oh wait, that's what when the dude that I used to date taught me how to shoot. He said, this is what we're going to get you, because until you know how to aim, this is how we can guarantee that you will hit whatever you're shooting at. So I just wanted to put that in context. Like the intention is that it will actually hit whatever you're shooting at, and
That's
then
right,
some.
because there's, anywhere from 2 to 10 to dozens of bullets coming out. Like you can imagine a shotgun when you hit, birds, or buckshot when you hit deer or game. You can't possibly shoot one bullet. You're shooting, many so that one of them hits it. It's the same thing, and it's just not what we should be using in the United States.
Kevin, you're nodding over there. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, there's just the way in which I've seen a lot of these weapons used on the ground is certainly frightening. I've been in Portland and I don't know for certain if I've been hit by any of these weapons specifically, but I've talked with Dr. Haar's colleague, Scott Reinhout, about the Stinger rubber ball grenades and these things that explode and shoot out all these rubber pellets. And he told me about how, these are very similar to the weapons that he's seen used in other countries, such as Chile, that have led to, I believe it's over like 80% of the overall serious bodily injuries. And so, yeah, these have very high capability of damaging people seriously. And it's there are other ways, at least I believe, that we could be managing the situation. And there's also just very little attempt from my experience to de-escalate. And I think that was a point that was also brought up in the report as well.
And I'll just insert myself again. My experience, 20 plus years on these streets, is that the escalation almost always is the cops. It is very rarely, regardless of folks' political ideation, started by the people that are in the crowd. Um, so I want to. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Har.
I was just going to touch on that because I think in dozens of interviews with experts on human rights, on civil liberties, on policing all over the country, I think that what you said is quite accurate. Police often, the training should be, and ideally would be, that they're, policing and keeping their own communities safe. But in our interviews, what we found is when you come with full riot control gear or a lot of weapons expecting a fight, it creates this like othering phenomenon where you're creating an us versus them dynamic that only really increases tensions and makes people feel farther away from each other. And with the weapons and all the gear, it also creates this like a military framework rather than a civilian policing. And, that's the difference between militaries and civilians. Militaries are fighting the enemy. Police are supposed to keep us safe. And then that gets all mixed up. and you see, that enemy dynamic on our own streets. And I think that's a little bit of what you're describing with, escalating tensions, making things worse, that kind of thing.
Right, and not just expecting a fight. I'm gonna come right to you, Kevin. Itching for a fight,
Hmm.
itching
Hmm.
for a fight, because this is how they're trained. Police are trained to subdue the suspect, which to me that's interchangeable with enemy, that word, right? As quickly and with as much force as possible. I'll say this last thing and then I'm turning to you, Kevin. When we do fights around the 1033 program, which is the program for my listeners that federal military weapons can the federal government can give them to police departments, the data shows that the police departments that have these weapons are naturally more violent because they're rolling around with military grade weapons in their car as if they are at war, which is why a lot of folks call these cops. And we're talking about, I'm talking about local, but we really need to be talking about federal, right? That we live in communities with occupying armies because that's how they move. Kevin?
Yeah, and I think just to, amplify that, there's my experience, especially with LAPD. One, they're extremely aggressive with the press, but I would say there's this very visceral look that they have on their face when they're in these situations. I've watched an officer go and baton a restrained protester breaking his shin on the ground, and I can't really describe it any other way than he has like 1,000 yard stare after that. It feels like they're detached from what is happening there. It's very much that enemy idea is just felt very intensely while you're in that moment.
Dr. Haar and Kevin, I want to get in a couple. I'm clocking time. I want to get into a couple of other weapons. The report also talks about powder blast dispersion rounds, also called muzzle blast rounds. What are these?
The pastor you described in Oakland who was shot in the face, that was with a powder blast dispersion round. The What happens is that at the tip of the muzzle, the the ball of pepper spray, whatever, explodes. So instead of it being like a pepper ball that, hits someone like a paintball and then kind of explodes, it explodes at the tip of the muzzle. The point is, again, a collective spray of this chemical irritant all over, so that it's supposed to, spray wider. The danger is both that it is another tool of collective punishment, spraying everybody in the area, being indiscriminate, and also that when it is shot directly at someone, you're shooting not just that spray at a high concentration, at a high volume, but also that that actual ball that it comes in comes out and, goes at least 3 or 4 feet. And so um, that let's say the bullet remnants will cause trauma, and then you have this high concentration chemical irritant exposure at the same time. We've also seen this in quite a few cases in Broadview in Chicago. I think one was on a child.
I have a question about chemical irritants, and this is sort of me taking a point of privilege because of how much tear gas I've inhaled. The right, so even if you're say you're in a crowd and this happens and you're not like directly hit like our beloved pastor was, but repeated exposure and I don't know, you may or may not have the answer to this, Dr. Hart, but repeated exposure to these chemical irritants when the people are in protracted struggle with the state. Is there any research or have you seen like long-term impacts on the body, the lungs, the organs from repeated exposure to these irritants? Do we know that they're dangerous to inhale?
Yes, we did a study in the West Bank in Palestine a few years ago where folks there were getting exposed to chemical irritants, multiple times a week for over a year. And you see a lot of different findings from that. Uh, all over the world, I've seen allergic reactions develop from repeated chemical exposure, but also kind of long-term respiratory issues. We surveyed folks who had had miscarriages because of that. whose children were suffering from asthma, who weren't healing well, whose skin wasn't, was rashy because of repeated chemical irritant exposure, especially in neighborhoods where it's getting into people's homes. That has happened in Portland as well, where it's,
Oh
in
yeah.
residential facilities. Uh, and then that all of that repeated exposure, one thing that, is very poorly studied, but definitely happening is that the psychological impacts of
I was
that.
just gonna go there.
And it's two ways. For people who are there, it can be traumatic. It can, feel terrible over time. And then for all of us watching TV, you know, the first article of the Bill of Rights is really free speech and assembly. But what we find is that this kind of behavior scares people, makes people be like, I just don't want to be there. We call that the chilling effect.
That's right.
And I'm happy to say that in the United States, I don't think we find any evidence that, our people are really fully being chilled and not going to protest. But many people describe being afraid for their children or their family to go into protests.
Well, I'm just gonna give real world impact right quick. When my daughter was younger, and it was during the Occupy, and for the most part, I would keep her off the streets. There was one protest where I brought her. I thought that we would be cool. We ended up not being cool. They didn't. That's the night actually Scott Olson was harmed, and she had her own security. She was little. She was on a security person's shoulders, and they attacked, and there was the tear gas and the flashbangs and the noise and all of that, and the security went running with my baby on his shoulder. And what I can tell you is that then every time, but I started to keep going out. My daughter would wail every time I walked out of the door, right? And so, I'm not afraid to say that. Hell yeah, that hell yeah, that stuff is terrifying. I think we do it anyway, right? We do it anyway, and what I'm
That's right.
interested in too is like the long term. And I didn't realize I'm doing a lot of work or thinking and working around trauma for our folks. It hit me about a year ago, maybe a little bit more, when I was looking at myself and my comrades who basically were at war with the state in the streets fighting for about a decade, the long term psychological trauma and the impact of that on our persons, right? And I don't think we talk about that enough. And that's a whole nother segment about what that leads to for our organizers and activists. But I wanted to really like anchor that in like, nah, people have actual I've seen people lose their minds. I've seen people be in struggle and literally, right, end up in mental health facilities. Like for real, for real. So, um, I want to ask one more questions. I want to give you all opportunity for closing comments, and really that is because I bet you my next guest is in the waiting room. Um, Use of force policy. So I started this by talking about right the lawsuit that we had in 2020, which in 2022 resulted in use of force policies. Not that they always follow them, because that happened during Oscar Grant too. But in theory, they're not supposed to use those weapons anymore. How do those use of force policies differ from like local law enforcement agencies to like federal law enforcement agencies like U.S. Customs and Border Patrol? Kevin?
Yeah, I know my understanding is in Portland that there are quite a lot of restrictions these days on how they're supposed to use these weapons. Portland Police Bureau is generally hasn't been using them very much, although they will come out with, or especially Oregon State Police will come out with various things. I know in Los Angeles, the for a while, I mean, I'm not there all the time, but I mean, they were openly defying their own court orders or court orders from the district court that was saying, okay, you can't use these weapons. Or as soon as they got the 40 millimeter launchers banned, they just switched to using what is it, 37 millimeter or something. I think, yeah, it's wild to see. And I remember there was the one time they said they asked their city attorney to try to overturn a ruling so that they could specifically shoot press again. Like that is looking at that at face value is absolutely insane. Um, but I know CBP, I mean, they're not following their own policies on this, especially with the FN 303. They're using these in a way that is considered deadly force in situations where it is not allowed or it's not reasonable and justified. And you can see in these videos they're aiming these weapons at head height. They shot me with a pepper ball at one point, and you can see in the video it goes right by somebody's face, and I'm like, oh, okay, you nearly blinded another person potentially on the way to hitting me. And
Right.
it's yeah, I think locally it depends locally for sure. There's quite a bit of variance, but it's concerning how just pervasive these are becoming across the board.
And
Dr.
if I'll add, I think um, been some really good movement across the US since 2020. In California, we have State Bill 48, which I think it was Senator Elena Gonzalez really pushed through a very good policy, both on, the fact that police have a stronger use of force policy, and also that there should be accountability when things go wrong, that police departments and corrections have to publish and make public their arsenals of what weapons they have. This is amazing versus most of the rest of the country. A few other states have done similar things. Colorado, Minnesota has also had some good movement, but then it's also gone backwards. For instance, in Minnesota, that work was under a federal mandate, and then that was revoked under the Trump administration.
Of course.
But you can really see that when police reform is operationalized, it can improve. For instance, what Kevin was saying about Portland in our forthcoming study, which will be out in a few weeks, looking at use of force in all of these immigration enforcement protests. One thing we're looking at is that in cities like Portland or Minneapolis, where police did do some work on reform, most of those incidents are from DHS and federal agencies. The local police are not as bad. In Los Angeles, where the police have not done the work, despite these laws and injunctions and so much, you see that LAPD and is really responsible for a lot. And I think it really shows that when you do the work, there's less harm, less injuries, and just really safer assemblies for the people.
Now I'm guessing you know what I'm finna say. I'm finna say all the police need to go bye-bye and we need to tear it all down and build something new. There's no such thing as good police. There's no such thing as better policing. There is radical reform, right, which we talk about the weight of the boot of white supremacy being lessened a little bit on our people's necks so they can move a little better. But I don't want to give, not on this show, I don't want to give police any credit for being good cops because I think that confuses the people. I want to say really quickly, and then I really do, I got to move on to my next test. We're going to talk about surveillance coming up next, but I do want to tell you, Dr. Haar, in particular, because you're local and anybody that's listening, if you are a survivor of state terror in any form or fashion, but particularly after these protests, you can come to People's House, APTP's People's House at 893 Willow on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. We've got traditional Chinese medicine. We have herbs. We have body work. We will treat you. It is free. Please come heal your body and your hearts and your minds so you can continue to fight this beast. I appreciate you both for joining me this morning. And please, Dr. Hart, let us know when that report comes out.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Talk again. Thank you for joining us. We've
Thank
been
you.
Thank you. We've been speaking to Dr. Rohini Haar, an emergency room physician, a UC Berkeley professor, member of Physicians for Human Rights. She joined us to discuss report tools of repression, the health and human rights impact of crowd control weapons. We were also joined by Kevin Foster, an independent journalist based in Portland, Oregon, who specializes in covering protests, activism, and accountability. Kevin authored a recent article in Truthout about the increasing use of so-called less lethal weapons. The article is U.S. is terrorizing its own citizens with less lethal weapons, victim says. Human rights experts condemn the increasing use of weapons like tear gas, pepper balls, and rubber bullets. By the way, Truthout don't have no paywall, so you can get some news without having to pay for it. There, that takes us to 8:36 in the morning here on Law and Disorder. I am your host, Cam Brooks. Those license plate cameras are about to start tracking, or maybe we're going to hear from our guests, are tracking a lot more than just your car. They are about to start siphoning information from the technology you have in your car. Every time I think I can't be any more like, wait, WTF? I'm more WTF. Joining us to discuss is Sarah T. Hamid, community organizer working at the intersection of technology and global and domestic warfare and punishment-based criminal and bordering systems for the past decade. Sarah is the director of strategic programming at Electronic Frontier Foundation, or EFF. Real quick, Sarah, can we just talk about, because I want to know, I know other people, no, I know other people have this experience, and I'm one of you. Can we just talk about, because I think the last time I had you on, we were talking about Flock and then also these cameras that Oakland was getting ready to install, and there's some like right down the street from my house. And I got one of those warning notices that they gave. And so I remember like when you used to get a red light ticket, it was just sort of like a picture of, I don't know, me with a cigarette in my mouth and sort of grainy and like the front of my license plate, right? And that was it. Okay. Not great, but fine. This time when I got my little warning ticket, they had like six angles of my car. They had it at different points. So like it wasn't just like the moment I passed the camera. It was coming to the camera. It was so before you could probably even track how fast it was leaving the camera. It was the streets on either side of me. Like it was like I felt tracked, not just caught speeding, but tracked. It was a very clear difference with a very visceral response from my body.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. And um, I think what most folks aren't tracking when they're seeing their cities contract things like flock safety cameras or even traffic cameras is that the vendors own the hardware. So they can keep updating the hardware if they want to, right? You're contracting as a city just the service, right? And access to the data. And Flock Safety continuously like updates its hardware. And it does so because it sells features to cities that they can upgrade on their platform, right? So some cities, they're just getting ALPR features, but you can upgrade that service to now have streaming features, right? So these are just video cameras that are constantly capturing data. And what your city gets access to, that's the thing that it's contracting and purchasing. So all of that information is still getting captured and locked in the vendor's cloud. And yes, that's what it's doing. It is tracking you.
That's bananas. And just real quick for folks, in 40 days, Oakland speed cameras tossed out 82,000 fines. I'm just gonna leave that there because that's not the topic of the conversation. But I get okay. Signal trace. What is this? What is this, Sarah?
Okay, so it's hit controversy in the US because it's an Italian defense company. It comes from Leonardo, and they've added a feature add-on to their ALPR package. Okay. It doesn't just read license plate. It builds what Leonardo calls an electronic fingerprint, right? We've heard Flock Safety talk about their vehicle fingerprinting. This is an electronic fingerprint. So when your car drives past a camera that's equipped with signal trace or a pole-mounted ALPR that's equipped with signal trace, the system captures identifiers of every Bluetooth or Wi-Fi enabled device in your vehicle, which includes your phone, your Apple Watch, your AirPod, your kid's tablet, the car's built-in hotspot, whatever it is, right? And the algorithm then links those devices to your vehicle and places a timestamp and location. So this means that even if you swap out your license plate or someone else is driving your car, the system can still track the consistent constellation of devices that travel with you, right? So Leonardo's own product materials describe this as identifying signatures frequently traveling together with individuals or vehicles. It's trying to get more granular and more precise, okay? Now, the even more scary part about this is that Leonardo's not rolling out new cameras. This is just a feature add-on that then you can equip to existing ALPR systems, right? This is why folks at EFF and folks who've been warning about these kinds of surveillance systems for years always talk about function creep, because you can continuously add on function creep. Last year, at the end of the year, Oakland City Council voted on, what is it, like something like 300 ALPR cameras, right? They voted for a punctuated moment where they contracted with a service, but the vendor owns the hardware and they can keep adding on those features, and those don't have to go through council review, right? So if Flock just adds on a feature to those ALPR cameras that includes a function like this, that feature is now accessible in that huge surveillance ecosystem.
Who is Signal Trace in communication with, partnership with, marketing to in the United States?
So I know that, or we know that right now it holds a contract with U.S. Special Operations Command and General Service Administration. But Leonardo also had like their LSAC system also has other partnership with other agencies throughout the United States. And that's one of the reasons why it becomes really hard to govern ALPR systems because this is not just one company with one product, right? This is a ton of companies. It's an entire ecosystem. It's an ecosystem that's been evolving for like something like 60 years, right? And at the end of the day, that data is legible to each other, right? So that's how you have like even if your local PD office doesn't have access to an ALPR system, if they have access to Thomson Reuters, they can still query ALPR data, right? Because that data travels in its package. So we know that Leonardo has like these particular contracts and relationships with the U.S. Special Operations Command. But the other question is like, where else have those like products been like procured? And where else is that data going? And what are those data sharing relationships? It's a super convoluted process, like system that's been set up across the country.
But they better not be able to query Thomson Reuters clear because there was a lawsuit in California that they had to settle. So they better be behaving themselves. I doubt they are, but they're supposed to be. Um, I I'm clocking time and I'm trying to figure out what most I want to utilize your brilliant minds for. Mind for. Is there? It's not. I want to go here. It is not lost on me, and I'm sure it's not lost on you and the comrades at EFF. That it seems at least that the more resistance that there is to this kind of technology, the more we protest, the more we scream and holler. Right? You all are not hollering. You all have been hollering for a long time. There's an ecosystem of us hollering about this now, right? Folks connecting the dot across intersectionally across movements about why this is a problem. It seems like the louder we get, the more the technology comes and faster. Or maybe am I just paying attention closer?
I don't think that is unrelated to our current political environment, right? The way that that technology is coming faster. But I think that sometimes it's that the technology is coming faster, right? And it's evolving independently of what's happening in movement spaces and what's happening in social movements, right? And right now we're at this moment where, like, if you look at the long history of ALPR, like ALPR systems that were first rolled out to fight like terrorism in the UK, right? And then brought here domestically for border policing, right? There have been times where the different parts of the tech stack have gotten cheaper, faster, and more evolved, right? So there was a time, for instance, when hardware got a lot cheaper and faster, and that's when flock safety entered the market, right? We're now at this moment where compute is getting a lot cheaper and faster. Obviously, the federal government, everybody is investing millions. Some would say this is the largest capital investment in like these huge hyperscale data centers, right? In order to make that compute cheaper and faster. So you're getting like an evolution of features where data is able to be fused faster than it has ever been able to be fused before, right? Things like evolutions in real-time crime centers where they're taking disparate feeds of data, whether it's like a video camera system or a CCTV system, combined with social media scraping, combined with all of that is happening because we're seeing the tech stack is evolving, right? So yes, it's happening, but it's also happening for like huge like macroeconomic reasons and the way that these industries function. But the thing that we have to always come back to is at the end of the day, those macroeconomic reasons and the way that the industry is evolving, right? That has political consequences. These are political decisions, right? So when Oakland, the supposedly progressive city, decides that it
Not
wants to
anymore.
contract 300 ALPR cameras, that is a political decision because it is allowing those sensors to capture data about the First Amendment activity, right? About the way that communities are showing up in mutual aid with one another, about the protest activity, about the political, like all of that activity, that data is now being captured, 99.99% of which has no law enforcement interest whatsoever, right? That's a political decision that they're making. And those lawmakers need to be held accountable for that. So even if it's just a startup that's just evolving the technology, innovating, whatever, that's having consequences on the kind of speech that we can have, on the kind of protest that we can have, on the kind of movement ecosystem we can have, and how we can show up and care for one another.
I'm just going over a couple of minutes because, sorry, y'all, no announcements today. I was talking to Chris Hedges last week, I think, Um, but actually not about Palestine, actually about the Delaney Detention Center in New Jersey, and something he put on his Substack. And one of the things that he said, was like, look, you can look at what's happening at Delaney, right? Delaney or Delano? Delaney.
Delaney, yes.
Delaney. And pretty soon that will be all of us, right? Dare you speak out against the government, you will be inside of these concentration camps. And I don't know, as you were talking, I was like, and this is the technology they will use to go find Sarah, to go find Kat, to go find, right? And round us up. Like, as I'm thinking about political consequences, and I'm thinking about political consequences in a time of fascism. It is not theoretical, y'all. We are here, and it is escalating, yeah?
Yeah, yeah. And that's why a lot of these tech vendors that have for 2 decades gotten away with just being like, we just create databases. We just create linked databases. We just create chips and things like that. Or even companies like Palantir, which make the argument that we just combine databases and we just do it in a privacy preserving way, right? They've been given this kind of neutrality of like, you're just creating infrastructure, when in effect, right, they're creating turnkey authoritarian technology, right, that can just plug and play and do that exact kind of tracking and silencing that you're talking about, right? And I feel like it's time that we hold both the lawmakers that procure these technologies and use public funds to like innovate and fund and seed these technologies, and these like tech companies accountable for these political decisions that they're making, because it's having consequences, right? Like, we talk about what's happening in Delaney, but the thing that we don't have a way of tracking is how many people won't show up now to a protest because of what they saw on their TikTok feeds from the Delaney actions, right? How many people are being silenced? How many people are being more quiet? How many people are, being more guarded and refusing to activate around this issue this way, right? That's the thing that we don't have numbers to track, but that's the real consequence of this kind of turnkey authoritarian surveillance.
All right, Sarah, I got to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining me. Stay safe, beloved.
You too. You too. Thanks so much, Kat.
We remain the vanguard of resistance of this country. The terrorists are law enforcement agents that are working to kidnap, disappear, and incarcerate our community members. And I want us to be real clear, we ain't never seen no time like this. This is a new game, and you all better sit down. We better sit down and inhale the realities that are on the street right now, and understand that the moves that we made now, that the impacts of our people, the increased desperation, the increased violence, the increased homelessness, the increased deportation, the increase, all of that is coming down the road. And so people ask you what to do now, get ready.